Telltale Games has to be one of the most well-known game developers of the early 2000s. They quickly garnered success by creating decision-making adventure games based on popular IPs of the time. But after over a decade of making some of the most beloved, narrative-driven adventure games in the industry, Telltale would eventually find itself on the brink of bankruptcy. In this video, I'll be going over the history of Telltale Games and explaining how such a well-respected and successful company ended up in such a harrowing situation. Before we start delving into Telltale's history though, first we have to talk about LucasArts. Back in the late 1980s all the way to the early 2000s, LucasArts was best known for making point-and-click graphic adventure games, with most titles receiving positive reviews and building a pretty substantial legacy for the company. Some of their most acclaimed titles included The Secret of Monkey Island, Grim Fandango, and Day of the Tentacle. But in early 2004, due to current marketplace realities and underlying economic considerations that made adventure games too risky for the company to continue pursuing, LucasArts would decide to pivot and end up cancelling any adventure games that were still in development at the company. After this drastic decision, most of the development team that prominently worked on these adventure game titles were sadly let go, and the company went from around 450 to just 190 employees. Some were lucky enough to move to other game development studios like Double Fine Productions or Autumn Moon Entertainment, but Kevin Bruner, Dan Connors, and Troy Melander made the massive decision to create their own, despite still having their positions at LucasArts. And this company they would end up starting was, of course, Telltale Games. Telltale Games was founded in July 2004 and was based in San Rafael, California. The company's first game was released on February 11th, 2005 and was called Telltale Texas Hold'em, which, believe it or not, was actually a poker game. Obviously, this game wasn't a serious attempt by Telltale to make something unique or groundbreaking, and before even releasing it, the team did mention that they'd be making a mini game or two before creating their first proper adventure game. So if anything, this game was just a test project for their brand new in-house game engine. In early 2005, Telltale Games would announce their first licensed title with the episodic formula they would later be known for, called Bone, which was based on an independent comic written and illustrated by author Jeff Smith. They planned on releasing new episodes of the game every few months, the first episode, Bone Out from Boneville, releasing in September 2005, followed by the second episode called The Great Cow Race in April 2006. After these first two episodes though, Telltale wouldn't revisit the series, despite having plans to come back to it. But to be fair, the company was still a small team of developers working on multiple projects at a time, as during development for Bone, they were also making CSI 3 Dimensions of Murder, which would be making infinitely more money for the studio at the time. And they were also preparing to work on the project they were most passionate about creating since the company's inception, a Sam & Max game, which are a pair of cartoon detectives that debuted in a comic series made in 1987 by Steve Purcell, and were used in one of the early adventure games LucasArts made while the Telltale founders were still at the company. Since leaving LucasArts, their goal was always to make an episodic adventure game based on the Sam & Max license, and this original idea is what essentially formed Telltale in the first place. But after attempting to acquire the rights from LucasArts, Telltale would be swiftly rejected, and sadly they had no other choice but to wait. As soon as LucasArts' options for the rights expired in mid-2005 though, the Sam & Max creator Steve Purcell signed over the license straight to Telltale, and they could finally start making the project they had been dreaming of since the beginning. Sam & Max Season 1, later renamed to Sam & Max Save the World, was announced in September 2005, and after the first episode was released in early 2006, it was made clear that this was Telltale's first real test of the episodic format in their games. There were 6 episodes in total that were all released monthly, and Sam & Max creator Steve Purcell was even directly involved with the game's development. Sam & Max Save the World turned out to be a massive success for the company. It received overwhelmingly positive reviews across the board and was Telltale's first big break in the gaming industry. They quickly followed it up with a sequel just 2 years later called Sam & Max Beyond Time and Space, which was also a major critical and commercial success. This was also the series that truly started opening doors for Telltale, as they would now have other franchise owners wanting to collaborate due to the company's recent success. Not long after the prominent success of Sam & Max, Telltale would start working on games of similarly sized IPs that have fairly small but dedicated fan bases, like Strong Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People, based on the Homestar Runner webtoon which they released in 2008, and Wallace and Gromit's Grand Adventures, which was developed in collaboration with Aardman Animations, was released in early 2009. Meanwhile, at LucasArts, Jim Ward, who was the CEO during the cancellation of adventure games within the company, didn't last long, and was soon replaced by Daryl Rodriguez in 2008. However, unlike Jim Ward, Rodriguez believed in the old LucasArts adventure game formula that built up the company since the beginning, so he decided to partner with Telltale on a popular adventure game license LucasArts still had ownership of, and that was the Monkey Island series. So with the help of LucasArts, Telltale was able to create Tales of Monkey Island. It ran for 5 episodes, which were released from July to December 2009, with Telltale offering the game on its own website, Steam, and Amazon, where the game would then proceed to be released on most other consoles during 2010. At this point, Telltale were solidified in the industry as a small but dedicated team of developers that could consistently deliver high-quality, classic-style adventure games. The studio was clearly supplying a niche that was quickly growing in the market, and because of that, the company was thriving. In June 2010, Telltale Games would make one of the biggest decisions a studio their size could make, as they would sign a deal with Universal Pictures. This deal allowed them to create 2 games based on 2 massive Universal franchises at the time, Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. Back to the Future trilogy co-creator, co-writer, and co-producer Bob Gale was brought on to consult about the game's plot, which was supposed to continue the story told over the 3 films, and Christopher Lloyd even returned to voice Doc Brown. Universal would bet heavily on this game, with the company even deciding to include a voucher for the first episode of Season 1 with every copy of the Back to the Future 25th anniversary Blu-ray release. The first episode of Back to the Future the game launched on December 22nd, 2010 for PC, with later releases on PlayStation 3 and iOS, and as expected, it eclipsed Tales of Monkey Island as Telltale's best-selling series at the time. The game received fairly positive reviews overall, and this was also the first game in Telltale's catalogue to fully showcase their unique visual style that they'd later utilise for future games. Jurassic Park, the game on the other hand, wasn't quite as successful. It released just over a year after Back to the Future the game, receiving mixed to negative reviews across the board, with most people slating it for having clunky game mechanics and a bloated cast of characters. And surprisingly, the game didn't seem to sell very well either. I think the main reason for Jurassic Park the game being such a flop though, was less down to Telltale's talent in making games, and more down to how out of their element the game seemed to be for them. Instead of being a point-and-click adventure game with a selection of puzzles to solve like their past projects, it was more centered around action scenes and character drama. The game also featured the chance to die during a playthrough and would include QuickTime events, which both hadn't even been featured in a Telltale game up to this point. But with that being said, this wasn't an entirely negative experience for the company, since the studio would eventually be known for mechanics like these further down the line. So really, this game acted as the first attempt of something promising for Telltale. It's just unfortunate that this first attempt was used on such a beloved franchise. But nonetheless, Telltale was still making marginal profits during this time, seeing yearly revenues of over $10 million, which was around a 90% increase compared to previous years at the company. Despite this newfound success and profits though, Telltale still managed to find bigger and better opportunities. As in 2011, the same year that Jurassic Park the game released, Telltale would announce 2 massive deals. The first was with Warner Brothers for the rights to the Fable comic series, and the second was for The Walking Dead, which is another massively popular comic book series created by Robert Kirkman. But at the time, it had also just recently released a live-action adaptation on AMC, which is a show I'm sure all of you have either watched or heard about at some point or another. It took what was already a considerably popular franchise to new heights, and proceeded to take Telltale Games along with it. Like Jurassic Park, characters could die and the player's choices frequently determined who would make that sacrifice. But unlike Jurassic Park, you were inhabiting the point of view of a single character, Lee Everett. Your choices carried forward from episode to episode, so your group of survivors could be vastly different from others. And Telltale would play this up with an online feature that could show you the choices other players had made. Season 1 of Telltale's The Walking Dead would start releasing on April 24th, 2012, and the game was universally loved by fans and critics alike. It captured the dire tone and relentless despair of the comics and television series, but the player had the ability to make all the important choices. Telltale's The Walking Dead also nailed the characters, offering up memorable first appearances for Lee, Kenny, and Clementine especially, who would go on to become a focus for the series as a whole. The first season successfully sold the illusion of a branching storyline where your decisions really mattered. It was another critical and commercial success for Telltale Games, becoming one of the biggest titles in the company's entire history, with the first episode selling over 1 million copies in just 20 days. And by early 2013, Telltale had earned around $40 million from The Walking Dead's first season alone. The game was a turning point for the company. From then on, all future Telltale titles resembled The Walking Dead in composition and mechanics. Much like LucasArts turning away from the classic point-and-click adventure games in 2003, Telltale Games started to do the same thing in 2012. Over the next few years, the company would continue adding multiple new entries to the Walking Dead series that all tried to capture the magic of the first season, such as The Walking Dead 400 Days, The Walking Dead Season 2, The Walking Dead Michonne, and the list goes on. Some were hits, while others left a lot to be desired. But regardless, Telltale was still growing substantially. After the significant success of The Walking Dead, the company would proceed to aim for more major licenses. The Wolf Among Us saw many of the same accolades as The Walking Dead Season 1. Tales from the Borderlands was an odd and interesting license for the company, but resulted in one of its fan-favorite titles.
What's that thing you dropped say? Catch, whatever the hell it says. It was a dull satellite. Now I suggest you start telling the truth before I blow your head off. So, what were you doing down there?
You want to know what I was doing on Pandora? Your mom.
My mom is dead.
Game of Thrones, Minecraft Story Mode, Batman the Telltale series, Guardians of the Galaxy, Telltale was scooping up some of the biggest licenses possible at the time. However, as successful as it looked from the outside, there were some real problems within. Working on so many series seemed to be slowly spreading the company thin. Fans and critics had begun calling on Telltale to update its engine, which was showing its age, rife with poor performance and numerous graphical glitches. The constant development led to an unhappy studio that was always crunching. Deadlines were ever present, heavy rewrites on games were always coming down the pipeline, and feedback from management and rights holders could widely vary in consistency. As quality was dropping and the studio was mired in crunch, none of these titles were leading to any profit at the company. Minecraft Story Mode, the first season of The Walking Dead, and the Telltale published 7 Days to Die were the only games that seemed to be working out for them. Batman the Telltale series was reportedly one of the worst commercial failures for the company, which is kind of sad because personally I quite liked the game. Game of Thrones, Tales from the Borderlands, The Wolf Among Us, and Guardians of the Galaxy also all failed to bring in much, if any, profit for the studio. And that's mainly due to the money spent just making these licensed games. Like having to pay for access to the license in the first place, having to give the company, creator, or both royalties and sales, and that's not even mentioning the taxes and platform cuts every game abides to anyway. To try and remedy this, a management shakeup occurred in early 2017, with CEO Kevin Bruner stepping down and Pete Hawley, formerly from a popular mobile game publisher called Zynga, was brought in to try and fix Telltale's problems. Internal restructuring led to around 25% of the company's staff being laid off in November 2017, along with an emphasis to slow down game production to improve production quality, retire the Telltale tool for a more standard game engine, and seek other lucrative properties to develop for. This new company focus resulted in an early 2018 deal with Netflix, which was announced at E3 2018, where Telltale would adapt its Minecraft Story Mode title into an interactive program for the streaming service. Netflix would also begin licensing the rights to Telltale for an adventure game based on its recent hit show Stranger Things, which was apparently offered back when the show first launched in mid-2016 but was turned down by management at the time, which if true has to be one of the biggest fumbles I've ever seen in my entire life. The Walking Dead, the final season, was also scheduled to be the last game developed on the studio's now outdated engine, and future projects were planned to be released on Unity. Despite the apparent upswing for the company though, it didn't take long for things to take a turn for the worst. In the process of developing The Walking Dead, the final season, Telltale was forced to initiate a majority studio closure. After their last investor had pulled funding. Telltale announced on September 21st, 2018 that it let go all but 25 of its staff due to the closure, meaning between 225 to 250 employees were let go, with those remaining strictly working on necessary projects for the company. Current CEO Pete Hawley would release a statement shortly after the news broke saying, "It's been an incredibly difficult year for Telltale as we work to set the company on a new course. With a heavy heart, we watch our friends leave today to spread our brand of storytelling across the games industry." During these sudden mass layoffs, a large majority of former Telltale employees would have an issue with the lack of warning they were given, with most employees apparently being told to leave the office building within 30 minutes of the company's decision, receiving no severance and only having a limited amount of time on their healthcare benefits. Melissa Hutchison, the voice actor for Clementine in the Walking Dead games, even said that for her, the news came in the middle of a recording session, which they had to immediately end. The suddenness of the closure, along with the lack of post-layoff support for the employees, led to renewed discussions about the need for video game developers to unionize. And on September 24th, 2018, a class action lawsuit was filed by former Telltale employee Vernie Roberts, which represented around 275 former Telltale employees, alleging that Telltale violated the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act of 1988 of requiring at least 60 days notification before issuing mass layoffs. Which, I mean, if a half-hour warning is accurate, then that's a pretty major violation to say the least. Telltale released the second of 4 planned episodes of The Walking Dead: The Final Season, as scheduled on September 25th, 2018, and stated that it had been contacted by multiple potential partners to help bring the last 2 episodes of the series to completion in some manner. During the 2018 New York Comic-Con, Robert Kirkman, the creator of the Walking Dead comic, stated that his production company, Skybound Entertainment, had completed negotiations with Telltale to finish the last 2 episodes of the final season for their Skybound Games division and with some of the original development team from Telltale. The last 2 episodes released on January 15th, 2019 and March 26th. Despite the development hurdles and other major problems Telltale were facing during its development, surprisingly, the final season managed to receive a generally positive reception, even being described by many as a return to form for the series, which just made what was happening to the studio behind closed doors feel even more unfair. Following legal negotiations in February 2019, LCG Entertainment acquired several key Telltale assets, and on August 28th, 2019 announced it was relaunching the company by assuming Telltale Games as its trade name under the leadership of founders Jamie Ottley and Brian Waddell. The new Telltale was set to re-release the old Telltale's back catalogue, as well as work on new games based on Telltale's affiliated properties, while licenses for past games and planned future projects like The Walking Dead and Stranger Things have since reverted to their original owners. The new Telltale still retained a couple popular licenses, such as The Wolf Among Us and Batman. The first game under this new company was a re-release of Batman the Telltale series, but added in a new noir-style shader with some remastered visuals, and was released in December 2019. The company also announced the long-awaited Wolf Among Us 2 at the 2019 Game Awards. They also recently just released their first brand new title since bringing back the company in 2019, called The Expanse, a Telltale series, which included 5 episodes that were released between July and September 2023. The game is a prequel based on a popular futuristic sci-fi show of the same name, and the game received a pretty positive reception overall. Some of the game mechanics were critiqued here and there, but the game's writing, visual animations, and character performances were given quite a lot of praise. So all in all, the game seems to be a step in the right direction for the company. As of now, The Wolf Among Us 2 is the only other new game that is planned to be released by the new Telltale, with it scheduled to come out sometime this year. Telltale Games used to be a company founded from a place of pure passion for adventure games, that only ever started due to LucasArts' complete switch in game direction and mass layoffs of talented employees. So it's sad to see Telltale eventually become what the original founders hated all those years ago. After finding major success, the company slowly seemed to let profits control their decisions more than the creativity and innovation they used to thrive on. And when those profits started to fade, like LucasArts, they turned to major downsizing. The company was luckily kept afloat by LCG Entertainment and are seemingly still developing projects that fans want to see, just at a much slower and more sensible pace. While it's unlikely they'll ever reach those high heights at the company's peak, I can't help but be a little optimistic for them. In a gaming landscape that is becoming steadily steadily more stale and full of copy and paste formulas, it's made increasingly more blatant when something diverts away from it. So as long as Telltale can learn to innovate and create unique episodic gaming experiences like they've done in the past, I'm sure they'll still find success. And who knows, maybe this will all end as one big redemption story.